Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Red, and this is my presentation on DDoS attacks in video games. So, why do we choose DDoS attacks over any other cybersecurity attack? Well, moral of the story is DDoS attacks are so much simpler and easier to implement that they're a more desirable choice if you're not trying to infiltrate and steal data. So here we go. DDoS attacks are focused at disrupting the flow or access of information or services, either temporarily or permanently. Since it's not focused on the data itself, it's easier to implement and execute. DDoS attacks are completely and utterly under the attacker's control, and they can be shut off at any given time. Like I said, DDoS attacks are so simple that an 11-year-old, given the right hardware, can implement a DDoS attack and shut down a server. Here's some fun facts about DDoS attacks. On average, DDoS attacks cost about 20 to 40,000 per hour that they're going on. The largest DDoS attack on record happened in 2020 to Google, which had a record peak of 2.5 terabytes per second of data coming through. Here's some more fun facts about DDoS attacks. And at the bottom, you see there, it costs as little as $5 to be able to hire somebody to perform and implement a DDoS attack on somebody if you don't want to go through the trouble yourself. Here's some more statistics about DDoS attacks. The average size of a DDoS attack in 2019 was 12 gigabytes per second. This comes from HelpNet Security. The number of DDoS attacks is expected to double to 15.4 million attacks by 2023. DDoS attacks account for more than 5% of all monthly gaming related traffic. 32% of serious DDoS attacks coincided with a network intrusion. The longest DDoS attack in 2020 lasted for 302 hours. Here's some stats for the United States. 20% of companies with a minimum of 50 employees reported suffering at least one DDoS attack. The telecommunications, financial services, and IT industries are the top 3 industries most likely to suffer from DDoS attacks. And the US was second to most DDoS targeted country in the world in Q3 of 2020, making up 15.75% of all attacks. The effects and consequences of DDoS attacks. Of all DDoS attacks, 50% lead to a service disruption, while 24% of DDoS attacks lead to services being completely unavailable. 26% of all DDoS attacks lead to the loss of sensitive data. Going worldwide now, the top DDoS attacks are the Google attack in 2015, peaking at 2.5 terabytes per second. The Amazon Web Services attack in 2020, I'm sure you remember that, lasted for 3 days and peaked at 2.3 terabytes per second. And here are some others. So why do people use DDoS attacks? What are the purposes of that? You can use a DDoS attack to silence or keep others out of maybe some rival political parties or a competitor that you would like to silence. You can shut down their servers or shut down their access to be able to reach out. You can use DDoS for hacktivism. DDoS attacks aren't necessarily about taking data. It can be used strongly to voice an opinion. Voicing your opinion on the web can have bigger and faster effect than if you were to attend in person in a rally or a strike. DDoS attacks are often used to show support or opposition regarding a certain topic. It can also be used in politics. Say you have a campaign opponent and they're putting out ads on the internet and linking to their website, you can launch a DDoS attack to be able to shut down their services and shut down their ability to reach out and recruit more supporters. Some attackers like to use DDoS attacks to implement some revenge, so to speak, on a company. Say a disgruntled employee feels like they got fired for a illegitimate reason and they wish to cause the company some sort of harm without putting themselves at risk. They can't go and burn down the building, but they can launch a DDoS attack on the building to shut down services for any length of time that they desire and cost the company money. DDoS attacks are also attacks that are used to mask something that's bigger going on in the background. So say you're trying to launch smaller attacks to be able to get a foothold or open up a back door in a firewall. Some people use a DDoS attack to take the focus off of those small pings on the firewall to focus more on restoring the services that are being shut down because of the DDoS attack. It more of serves as an indirection, like in a magic trick. You're focused on the magician's hand while he's stealing your watch. Some people just like to cause trouble and they like to see what they can do. Their minds are working at a higher level, which is too much for their own good. And they think it's fun to be able to shut down a server and keep people out of information just because they like it. So now that we've discussed why DDoS, why choose DDoS, what would you use it for? How does a DDoS attack actually work? Well, to be able to figure out how a DDoS attack works, we first have to figure out how the internet works, because it has to do with a lot of communication back and forth between you and the internet and what's on the internet. So here we go. So what is the internet? The internet is a massive infrastructure that supports the flow of different types of information and services. You can go to google.com, search up a picture of a ferret, or you can go to YouTube and you can search up a picture of a ferret jumping through a field. There's two different types of data and two different types of services. You can be watching a Zoom call in person, or you can be watching something recorded like you are right now. So how does it work? When you browse to a website, yes, you're pulling up a website, but essentially what that website is a file that is saved onto a server that is linked to a DNS server. So you send a request out to this server that the file is saved to, and you say, hey, can I access google.com? The server will say, yeah, sure, here you go. It'll hand the file path back off and it'll send it back to you. Well, the internet reaches all over the world, as we all know, and it's a useful tool for billions of people. For that being said, where are the servers going to send back your information once the request has been accepted? How do they know where you are in the world? How do they know that you're in Central Arkansas and not in Dubai? How do they know that you're in Wisconsin and not in Hawaii? Then we get to this thing called an IP address, and it's exactly how it sounds. It's an address that is used to track you to a location, to a server, to a DNS server that ties to you, that the information can be sent back to form a connection from you to that server, like google.com. So when you send a request, your computer contacts your local server, which will probably be your modem unless you have a really sophisticated network, sends a request to your modem. Your modem then sends a request to what's called a DNS server to get an IP address. Once the IP address is assigned to you, if you don't have one statically assigned already, then it reaches out to the cloud, which then goes and finds the server like google.com. It goes to find that server for google.com, says, hey, Nathan Red would like to access google.com. Google says, yeah, sure, here you go. And it sends it back from Google's server to your DNS server, back to your modem, back to you. And the way that it knows where to send it to is from your IP address. In our slideshow today, we're going to be using an analogy with nerds clusters. In this analogy, your computer, i.e. you, what you're working on, is going to be a single grain of sugar. Yeah, just imagine how small it is. It's a single grain of sugar. Your modem will be a nerd. So every piece of equipment, laptop, cell phone, smart TV, Xbox, computers, tablets, you name it, et cetera, anything that connects to your modem is going to be a sugar. Your modem is then going to be a nerd, and then your DNS server will be a nerd cluster. Then we'll have a jar, which is essentially the internet, which holds all of the DNS servers together and allows them to talk to each other. So DDoS attacks, how does it work? Now that we have a little bit about how the internet works, you'll be able to grasp this concept a little bit better. Like I mentioned earlier, when you want to browse to the internet, you must first obtain an IP address. To put this into a smaller perspective, imagine that you are a server. You have 2 ears to be able to listen to requests from different users, and you have 2 arms to be able to carry out those requests. So think of that like you're a DNS server. Say you have 2 arms and 2 ears. You're going to be able to help out 2 people at one time, listening with 1 ear, executing with 1 hand, and so on and so forth for the other. You'll be able to do that in multiples of 2 as long as you can keep up with that workflow. Now take those 2 people and turn them into 1,000 people that are all talking to you at once. You're not going to be able to, 1, distinguish the requests, and 2, execute the requests in an efficient amount of time. You're going to either succumb to the pressure, or there's going to be users in the back of the line, numbers 995 through 1,000, that are going to eventually just end up leaving because they can't get their information. This is a timeout. A DDoS attack isn't aimed at information and personal data. These attacks are aimed more at the servers and services that the data is used for. The DDoS attack will overwhelm the target server, the 1,000 people surrounding you, with false information or requests that come from devices that are not actually trying to use the information. These are called false requests, or we can call them spam for short. On the network, each request takes up space. It's data coming in to the server. Much like each person in our example takes up space around you, a server can only handle so much data coming through before it inevitably crashes or starts to mix up requests and send out false data. This is what you saw earlier, in the largest DDoS attack to date reached a peak of 2.5 terabytes per second. This means that 2.5 terabytes of spam data was sent to the server, making unimaginable numbers of requests every second. That's a lot of junk data coming through. So imagine 2.5 terabytes of spam data. If we say each request is a byte of data, a terabyte is over 1 million bits of data. That's over 2.5 million people surrounding you, talking to you all at once, trying to get information from you, and you only having your 2 arms and 2 ears to be able to carry out the requests. So now that's essentially how a DDoS works. But how do attackers send out these millions of requests from their one computer? Well, there's 3 options they can do that. They go from super, ultra complicated, quantum physics level complicated, to a relatively complicated attack, to a wash your hands, be done with it, easy, cheap option. Here they are. So option 1, super quantum physics level complicated option. An attacker can spend the thousands and thousands of dollars buying servers, building virtual servers on top of those servers, buying all the network equipment, routers, modems, you name it. They're spending the time to build this botnet in a room, paying for the network, paying for the electricity that it's going to be consuming. And then there you have it. They have a botnet created that they have complete and utter control over, that they can flip a switch, turn it on, and implement an attack on somebody. Option two, the most common option, is an attacker uses cyber attacks like phishing and false links to install malware that give the attacker full control of the computer, leaving the victim oblivious to the attack. An attacker will send out a false email with a link, or put an ad out on a website that has a link to a false website that installs something on the back of their computer that gives them control to be able to send out requests without the user even know that it's going on. And their point of view, their computer works fine. They're not doing anything wrong. They're none the wiser. Number three, remember how I said earlier when I was going over the fun facts, somebody could pay $5 for an attacker to DDoS someone? There you go. Pay $5, wash your hands, walk away. Whoever you just set that hitman out on is going to get DDoSed. You have nothing to do with it. All right, so option number two would be the only feasible option for a hacker or attacker like you and I, if we wanted to DDoS somebody and we wanted to have complete and utter control over it. This is the path we would do. An attacker will build up their host of computers that will form what we call a botnet, the individual computers being the bots. They are able to use this botnet at will while the bot's users are oblivious that they are part of a large-scale assault on a company's infrastructure. They use different variations of malware, the virus, the worms, adware, scareware, Trojan horse, and spyware, all to be able to install their malware on computers to be able to use them for their botnet. Once the attacker has built up a substantial botnet, they are ready for an attack. DDoS attacks are some of the hardest to track down because when they're deployed, the attacker is not using their own personal device to send out the spam request. They're using their botnet's computers instead, which have their own identifiable IP addresses. Also, if an attacker seems to think that they're being tracked down because of their IP or their DDoS attack, they can just shut the attack off at will, and there's no paper trail pointing back to them being the attacker that deployed the DDoS attack. Once the attacker is ready to start their attack, they'll simply start targeting their bots to spam out requests to the target, overwhelming the target's network infrastructure and disabling it as long as the attacker's desires. Remember how I said that the AWS attacks lasted over 303 hours? There you go. So, how do DDoS attacks work in video games? There are a couple different ways DDoS attacks can work when it comes to video games. Think of the communication you have when you have a video game as this that you see in the bottom. You have a user here connecting to your server, which will be your modem, connecting to the cloud, and that cloud contains the servers for, say, Call of Duty. This right here, this will be your DNS server, your modem, all of your own personal infrastructure here. An attacker can disrupt the communication from you to the server, which would mean getting DDoS in a game. So here we are from you to the server. Number one, an attacker can implement an attack here, cut off that communication. Also, an attacker can disrupt the communication from the server to the internet. They can come and put a wall up between the server and the cloud, separating you from the COD servers. So we're going to cover the bigger one first, the server to the internet. Remember how I said that we were going to use an analogy with nerd clusters earlier? Think of the internet as a jar of nerd clusters. Each cluster is a DNS server that exists within the internet. Each nerd, again, is a local server, and each grain of sugar is any given nerd is an individual user. When you're trying to play a game, you first send out a request to your DNS server connecting to online servers. You get an IP address, and then you, with that IP address, you browse out to that server, the COD server, and you say, hey, Nathan Red's trying to play some COD. Is he allowed to? Obviously, they're going to say, yeah, sure, let him go on. They're going to send that back to your DNS server and then send it back to you. So say you're trying to connect to Call of Duty servers. These servers aren't going to be local to you because they're spread out over most of the world. I can be playing in Central Arkansas. Somebody could be playing in Dubai, India, or Beijing, China. You have to establish a connection to the server for your information to go back and forth to play the game. Each player has to make a request to the server to connect, for a connection to be established for them to be able to play the game online. An attacker will start to send millions of spam requests to the server that will not only form any sort of connection, beginning to overflow the server's network with traffic that it cannot handle. So, and a good example of this would be the Sony servers going down almost every Christmas. In 2020, the Microsoft and the Sony servers went down right on Christmas Eve because a new game had just launched and there were millions of players waiting in line on Christmas Eve to be able to play it. A attacker sent out a DDoS attack that shut down the services, shut down the servers, making it to where nobody could establish a connection to that DNS server. It was basically like taking that nerd cluster and plucking it out of the jar. Nobody could talk to it because it wasn't in the jar anymore. Then we have our smaller example. Now we're dealing with each nerd cluster. We're going from your user, which will be the grain of sugar, to the server, which is going to be the nerd cluster, as you see there. Think of your DNS server as the nerds cluster and each nerd to be your local server on your network. It's probably going to be your modem at home. You have probably been the victim of a DDoS attack or know somebody who has been. You're playing your video game with your friends and all of a sudden you get disconnected, but your friends are still able to play with everyone else in the game. Not only are the attackers able to target the host servers, they're actually able to target you individually as well. Remember how I said that you have to reach out to get an IP address from your DNS server? And I explained to you how the IP address is used to link you back to your physical location that your computer is at. Well, an attacker can spoof your IP address and get your IP address, which sends them information that they need to be able to locate not only you, but your modem or your local server that you're connecting to connect to the DNS server, to connect to the internet, to connect to the servers, and vice versa the other way. They're able to take and target their botnet at your specific modem using your modem's IP address and do the exact same thing that they would when they targeted Sony and Microsoft's computer servers. They're able to flood your network with more requests than it can handle, causing it to crash and not be able to take your request going out to the DNS server and do anything with it because it's dealing with the thousands or the millions of requests coming in. It can't focus on the 5 millionth person out there trying to get a request to go out. That's how we have it. That is the end of DDoS attacks on the video game side. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope you learned a lot about the simplicity, the anonymity, and the deployability of DDoS attacks and how they are used in video games. This is Nathan Red. Thank you for watching.